Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be back after a long month or so off the air, but it is good to be back with you here at lunchtime on the East Coast, and probably well, I know we've got a good West Coast audience, so thank you for joining us early, really at the start of your day. And today's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've had the chance to spend a little time with Laura, and well, we did a call last week. In fact, that was really insightful. So I know this is going to be worth your time today. The point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn something from, so that we can get better at what we do. The fun part about it is that it can be interactive. So the way that happens is if you get on your keyboard and you type a question to us on one of the bazillion platforms that we're on like LinkedIn, of course, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all at the same time. So if you're on any of those platforms, type us a question and we'll try to get to it today in the conversation. Today, Laura Gassner Otting, a fellow MG1 Marshall Goldsmith 100 coach. So we have that in common. She helps people get unstuck in their thinking and in what they're trying to do. I love her bio because she says she's turned on by the audacity of the big idea. I love that. Wish I could steal it, but I can't. But anyway, she's an instigator, motivator, and provocateur, which I think is also another great line. We're gonna have to talk about that today. She served as a presidential appointee in Bill Clinton's White House, helping shape AmeriCorps. She left a leadership role at the respected nonprofit search firm Isaacson Miller to help expand execsearches.com. And she founded and ran the nonprofit Professionals Advisory Group, which partnered with a full range of mission-driven nonprofit executives and companies. She's the author of Mission Driven, a book for those moving from profit to purpose, and her latest book, Limitless: How to Ignore Everybody, Carve Your Own Path, and Live Your Best Life, which we're going to talk a lot about today. Laura, welcome.
Hey, Rhett, it is so great to be here.
Hey, and I want to mention your LG OTV. I want to talk about that today too, because I want to plug that. And are you going to start that back up I know you just did one season. Are you going to do another bunch of interviews this year?
Yeah. We're starting the next season the first Tuesday in February, and it's going to run every Tuesday and Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern. And again, like Power Lunch, it's going to be live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. So yeah, what I'm doing is I'm basically interviewing people who have had this moment where they've seen their potential and they realize I can't unsee it, and what they did in their lives to reach that and not just survive it, but thrive in it, so that they lost imposter syndrome. They were able to achieve more. They were able to get through this thing so that they could become what they really know is inside them, live into this burden of potential that they feel so deeply. And that's going to be part of what will be in my next book. So I'm sort of doing this as book research, but also I figured if I'm doing it as book research, I might as well record it. I might as well go live. I might as well like have this as marketing fodder for video, for audiobook, etc. But I just thought these conversations are so interesting. As you mentioned, I'm so turned on by the audacity of the big idea, and I'm so deeply interested in the people and the stories behind these ideas. And I think that's really where the good stuff is.
Yeah, indeed. And you are described as an instigator, and a motivator, and provocateur. Do you agree? Do you like that sort of moniker or that description?
I mean, it's really kind of true. I'm one of those people who I mean, I've talked people who were 100 pounds overweight into training for and running their first marathons. I mean, I've talked people into leaving their work to start new businesses. I mean, just I like when here's the thing. I spent 20 years doing executive search, and when you do executive search, you're trained to listen to what people say. But you're also trained to listen to what they don't say, and to like see the body language or the glint in their eye or the hope,
Mhm.
the energy that they feel when they talk about somebody and what they've done, or maybe a hope and a dream. And if you just stop and you're like, well, why don't you do it? Like, why not you? And then they start
Yeah.
thinking about it. And what I saw in search is that the internal candidates who didn't get the job always left. And it's not because they were pissed off about how the process worked, although sometimes, of course, they were. But even if they were treated super well, they always left. And it's because in the process of doing the interview, they had to imagine themselves in the role. They had to wear the clothes and practice the answers and think about the strategy and be that executive director or that CEO or that vice president of whatever for an hour, for a week, for a day, and live into that person. And then when they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. And so if you just stop and you say to somebody, well, why not you? Like, what would it feel like? What would you do? What kinds of steps would you take? What's next? What would happen if you fail? And then people are like, well, I just go get another job and I go back to my cubicle or I do whatever. And then you're like, what would happen if you succeed? And then you start seeing them in this space where they're like, oh, well, what would happen if I succeeded? And you know, you want to be a motivated instigator or provocateur, just ask people about what what success would feel like for them. And boom, it's like you just catalyze the spark in their TNT.
I love it. I read a quote where you said, if all we get in life is what we deserve, we would never get what we demand. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
I mean, it's kind of a pushy quote, right? But it's a little audacious, right? Again, that's the provocateur part of me. But so many of us go through life thinking, I'm just going to put my nose to the grindstone, shoulder to the wheel. I'm going to do the hard work and people will notice and I'll get rewarded. And it doesn't happen. You get passed over. Somebody else goes on a golf outing with the boss, and then suddenly he gets the promotion, and you're like, I don't understand. Right. And
Right.
the women who are out here listening, I'm talking to you especially. Women have to be asked an average of 7 times if they'll go for a promotion, if they'll start the business, if they'll run for office, if they'll do the big thing they want to do. Whereas men, they barely have to even be asked at all. And
Right.
that's not a blanket statement that's all women and all men, but we sit and we say somebody's going to see me, I'll get what I deserve. And I say stop doing that. Like, decide what you want in your life and then go out and let people know. Let people know you're going to do it. Let people know that you want it. Let people know you're interested. And suddenly they'll invite you to be the fourth at the golf tournament or whatever it is, like where the people are who make the decisions about who's going to be put in the position that then gets you into the project that is seen by the boss who makes the decision about the promotion. But it doesn't happen if you just sit around thinking, oh, well, they're just going to see me slaving away here when I'm working late at night. Well, they don't, because they're out, having the poker game.
That's right. What talk about this year and COVID, and what was your best and your worst COVID moment? And then I guess one of my big questions for you is, would Limitless be the same book if you wrote it today based on the last year?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll answer the second question first because that's super easy. Limitless would absolutely be the same book. And I think more than ever, the lessons in Limitless about finding your consonance, your alignment, your flow, what actually brings you happiness. I think we have all been faced with this question of when life goes back to normal, is the normal I'm going back to really the life that I want? And I think more so than ever, Limitless answers that. And I know we're going to get more into the details of consonants and what all that means.
Yeah.
But I wrote Limitless because I spent 20 years calling thousands of people, tens of thousands of people on behalf of my clients, asking them if
Mhm.
they're interested in another job. And I called the most successful people in the world because that's what my clients wanted. That's who they wanted to recruit. And despite all that success, they all took my calls because they were not that happy. And I think more than ever, we're all in this place now where we're like, maybe what I was doing before isn't right. So I do think Limitless would be the same book, although of course there'd probably be a chapter on COVID in there. But I think the lesson is the same. So that's the answer to the second question. The answer to the first question about what was my worst and my best COVID moment is actually the same moment. I woke up one day and I just felt this devastation. I felt this loss. I felt this sadness. And and I had been feeling it for weeks. I mean, the sadness of my kids missing, the prom, missing their senior captaincy on a team that they'd worked on for years. Seeing so many students trying to figure out, are they going to go to college? Are they not going to go to college? people losing their jobs, people losing their loved ones. And I was carrying that around. And this is back in the time when we were all still like washing our groceries and letting the mail sit in the sunshine for a week before we touch it. And it was scary. It was really scary and uncertain. And also, I make my living as a speaker. I'm a professional keynote speaker. So there are no events. Every day in my email box is like cancellation, cancellation, cancellation. And suddenly my entire business is like gone. And that was a low point. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know who I am anymore. Suddenly my entire identity, my professional identity is gone. And I am uncertain of when it's ever going to come back, if it's ever going to come back. And then I spent some time thinking about it. And what I realized was maybe I was setting my sights too low, actually. So the
Okay.
saddest moment for me came when I got a cancellation for a 5,000 person audience event. And I was like, that was it. Like, that was going to be the biggest stage I'd ever been on. My biggest one before that was literally half of it, 2,600 people. And I was so sad about it when it first
There were some
happened.
other
And
words in there, I'm sure, too, right?
sorry?
There were some other words in there too, I'm
Oh,
sure.
there were a lot of words, and they all began with F. Every way you could possibly make that word into a word, yeah,
Right.
those things came out of my mouth. And then I got an invitation to speak on a virtual event for 10,000 people. And I was like, this is interesting. So my worst moment was this, like, who am I? Who am I when my business is gone? I don't have professional identity. I don't know how the income's coming in. And then I got this additional invitation. And what I realized was I was asking myself the wrong question. I was asking myself, how do I be a speaker in the days of COVID when there are no speeches? And what I should have been asking myself are three different questions. Number one, what is the problem I want to solve in the world? Number two, what is the solution that I have that problem needs? Like, what solution can I bring that's actually useful to the problem? And then number three, what's the best medium through which I can do it? And what I realized is that I'm not a speaker. I'm an author and a thinker about certain ideas. And what I do is I solve problems. I help get people unstuck. I'm not a speaker. I'm someone who helps people get unstuck. And as soon as I made that mindset shift, I created
Yeah.
courses. I started doing online speaking. I started, this Big Talk podcast. I started doing, LinkedIn lives, a few times a week. I started serving my audience in a way where now I could be speaking on any given day to 10,000 people, 50,000 people, doesn't matter. I was setting my sights too low, thinking that the only audience I had was the audience that was handed to me by somebody else who made a decision that I belonged there, when really the audience that I have is all the people that I can reach.
Right. You talk about in the bestseller Limitless. I'll give it a plug. I've got my own very nice copy here that you graciously signed. Um, you talk a lot about, or you talk about success doesn't equal happiness. And I mean, you kind of refer to it a little bit in what you were talking about when you would talk to executives, right? Um, why do we accept why do we accept that sort of in our lives, um that I don't know, I don't want to call it the status quo because it's not, but I mean, why do we accept not having that completeness, I guess? I don't know how to really characterize it, but do you know what I'm talking about? I mean, why do we accept just going through the motions, or that the great job? I mean, I quit a job. I had a great life. I had a great salary. I got to travel around the world. I got to help people. I had a great, and everybody told me I was crazy for quitting that job to start a company. Um, but why do people just stay?
So there's a couple things that are happening. The first is, at some point in our lives, somebody hands us a scorecard. And that scorecard says, this is the right house, this is the right spouse, this is the right job, this is the right paycheck, this is the right car, this is the right clothing, this is the right clothing size, right? They hand us the scorecard that says this is what success means. And all you have to do is, look on the internet to see, the standard for all of these things. And what happens is we actually get handed the scorecard before we even realize we're being given the scorecard. Like I had a fourth grade teacher who was like, Laura, you're pretty argumentative. You'd make a good lawyer. And Rhett, of course, she won't be surprised to find out that I told her she was wrong. Because, I'm argumentative. But then I thought, well, lawyers are successful. I'm, a kid in 1982 and LA Law's on TV and lawyers seem to be glamorous. And so I'll become a
Kind of
lawyer.
cool, right?
And I created an entire educational path that got me to law school, where I looked around the first week and I was like, I've made a huge mistake. I don't belong here. This isn't me. So I didn't fit that definition of success. I started dating a guy after I dropped out and joined a presidential campaign who was like my parents' ideal man. And every time I kissed him, all I could think of was like butter, milk, eggs, cream cheese. I just like, there was no spark. And so I broke up with him, much to my grandmother's chagrin, and I didn't fit her definition of success. And then I got a job working, fast forward 10 years, working for like the big firm, the marquee firm, the job everybody wanted. And I realized that I wasn't actually serving my clients. I was serving my boss's need to fill his P&L. And so I didn't fit his definition of success either, because I wanted to be there for my clients. And so at every step of the way, we're given this definition. And when it doesn't feel right to us, we feel like we're wrong. So that's the first thing that happens. And then the second thing that happens is we understand that there's something that's going on and we agitate against it, and it starts to feel like organ rejection. So we go and we talk to somebody who loves us and we tell them about our big dream, and they go, oh, you can't do that. That's scary. And what they really mean is, oh, I can't do that. I'm scared. And maybe they love us and they're afraid we're going to get hurt, so they want to protect us. Maybe they're, jealous and they are sizing themselves up by where they are compared to us. Maybe they just don't know any better. Right? It could come from all sorts of reasons. And whether it's their fear, whether it's their love, whether it's their jealousy, we tell ourselves this lie. And the lie we tell ourselves is that their votes matter. And the truth is they don't. Like, we have to think about whose votes actually matter, and we have to stop giving voices to those who shouldn't even have those votes. So I think it happens in this sort of insidious way that we don't even realize. And then we invite it into our lives in a way that we're not even expecting the answers. But so many dreams are killed in that moment of, oh.
Yeah, I know that look.
On.
I mean, how do we? Okay, because I know this. I've got that same story, and time and time again in my life. But how do you find the right people to talk to? Because to me, I mean, I had to fire consultant after consultant in my toy company because they told me it couldn't be done that way.
Right.
And I said, I disagree. We have to do it that way because that's who we are. Yes. If we try to do it some other way, we're not gonna be successful, right? And so I got tired of people telling me how it should be done or it couldn't be done that way. Mm-hmm. And I mean, but how do we find those right people? Because I mean, to me, that's really how do you find that network of people that really support you in that way?
So personally, on the personal side of things, I think we have to remember that, we think that we go to our family, our parents or like our childhood friends. We think that we go to them because they've known us the longest. And the truth is, I mean, I'm going to turn 50 in February. The last time I lived in the same house as my parents was 32 years ago, right? Like 2/3 of my life ago. And I used to leave socks. I used to leave socks on the floor in the middle of the living room and put the empty gallon of milk back in the refrigerator. And I'd leave the car on empty. And, the radio, of course, turned all the way up. So, my parents, there was a part of them who they don't see me as the person I am today. They can't see me. That's the last time they knew me. And even though they've seen me and they've watched me on stage and they've seen me get awards and all that, we don't live in the same city. We certainly don't live in the same house. There's just no way that they can understand what I'm capable of. So I think that we need to surround ourselves with family. And family is the combination of friends and family who actually are like your personal board of directors. They're the ones who know who you are, what you're capable of. They can hear your hopes and dreams. They're there for you when you're scared. They're there for you, sit through you when you're planning. They're there for you when you strategize. And they're the ones who you go to and you say, I have an idea and I don't want you to give me feedback. I want you to ask me questions.
Mm.
Right? When somebody asks you questions, somebody's not going to say, Rhett, we can't do it that way. They're going to say, Rhett, what do you want to achieve from this? Why do you want to accomplish this? Why do you want to create it the way that you created? And in the answers to those questions, we often find a path forward. So that's on the personal side. On the professional side, let me tell you about a huge mistake that I made when I ran my company. Or two huge mistakes. The first is I would hire for skill set. I'd hire for skill
Yeah.
set and I would
Yeah.
say, I'm going to bring somebody in who's a vice president at another big search firm. I'm going to bring them in because they know how to do search. And then they would come to my company. And what I would realize is they didn't know how to do search the way we did search. They knew how to do search the way someone else did. And so I would have to spend time undoing bad habits that they didn't necessarily agree were bad habits before I could teach
Right.
them stuff. So I hired for skill set at the top level. I also didn't hire for culture fit at the top level or the bottom level. And rather than looking for somebody who knew how to do the work, I had to look for somebody who knew how to learn and to feel okay that failure wasn't finale, it was fulcrum, so that we could be in a place where we were constantly learning and we were there for our clients first and all the things that matter to us as an organization. So I came to learn that, we had a manifesto that I wrote about why we did the work we did. And I used to have our employees sign it. I'd read it and sign it and understand it. And then we would have quarterly reviews where we would actually pull out the manifesto and say, like, what is it to be a good citizen of this company, of this community that we have? And are you upholding who we are as a company? Because in doing that, then we serve our clients. The second mistake that I made is that I thought that if I just brought people in from the outside, there'd be easy wins and I'd suddenly have people who knew what they were doing. And what I realized is that I had to actually grow people from within. And that helped me to not have these people who had an idea, a preconceived notion about what was possible, what was not possible, but I sort of brought them up in our ecosystem of the sort of manifesto of what we considered
Right.
quality to be for our clients. So, here's the thing. So many times we let our ambitions be limited by the imaginations of others instead of
Yeah.
saying maybe their imaginations just aren't enough for me. And I need to go out and find somebody who is more in line with my imagination.
I love that. I mean, and it's such a, I mean, yeah, that leaves me speechless. That's something I'm gonna be thinking about a good bit.
Well,
Um,
you're a writer,
there's-
so for you to be speechless, that's
that's,
patting myself on the back
um,
here.
but that's a brilliant way to think about it. I mean, think about hiring. I mean, it just changes. I mean, it's a whole shift in your mentality. I know one of the things that we did in the toy company was we really couldn't afford um, the A players, right? And so we kind of came at it a little differently than you, but kind of with the same result, which was we brought people who were hungry.
Hmm.
And I mean, my chief designer was a high school dropout, and I mean, I wanted somebody from the fit design school, but I couldn't afford somebody from the fit design school early on. But I got a self-taught guy that was super hungry, super talented, and this was his shot.
Hmm.
He wasn't going to get a shot at another company. And boy, I mean, it just he blew us away all the time. But I think you're absolutely right. So you
So
talk about
before you
and
ask the next, I just got to jump in here for 1 second. When I would interview candidates for my clients, I was the CEO of the company. By the time people got to me, they were qualified for the job. Like they could
right,
do the what, and we understood the how. So I never asked them about that. I asked them to give me stories, and I looked for 5 things. I looked for hunger, weight, tenacity, speed, and grit. Hunger. How much do they want it? Tenacity. How, how tough are they? Speed, how quick from failure to fix, do they get?
Mm,
Uh, Weight, how serious of a person are they? Can I put them in front of my most important client? And then grit, just how many times are they gonna go to the mat, come back up, go to the mat, come back up in terms of learning how to do it? So weight, what did I say? Hunger, uh, speed,
right.
tenacity, weight, and grit. I think I did it in a different order the first
Yeah.
time, but I looked for those 5 things, and I'm embarrassed to say, the cobbler's children have no shoes. It took us years before we turned that lens on our own hiring, but, you mentioned looking for people who are hungry. The people who we found who were hungry, they were some of our best employees, and you'll love this. We actually came up with this, and it wasn't me, so I can say it's brilliant. We came up with this brilliant strategy. I brought in a business partner a few years into running the company, and she was the trailing spouse of somebody who worked, for the US State Department. And, she was bored out of her mind, right? She has a PhD in psychology from Georgetown. She is an absolutely brilliant person who had no job prospects, but to maybe like go file in the ambassador's office. Like there just wasn't much for her to do.
Yeah.
And when she would go to these parties, the State Department parties, and she would meet other spouses just like her. And these men and women were also brilliant. Like think about people who work in the U.S. State Department. They are well read. They speak multiple languages. They're absolutely, always up on current affairs. We were doing work for nonprofits, for advocacy organizations, for foundations, for universities. They are just incredible humans, and they are bored out of their minds. So at least
Yep.
half of our team at any given time were trailing spouses. They were so hungry. They were so interested in the work. They were so thrilled to be doing anything. They became some of our best employees.
Yeah. I I I get that. Believe me. um, you talk about ignoring in the book. You talk about ignoring the rules that create limits, right? What do you mean by that? And how do you get in the right mental space to sort of throw out that scorecard that you were talking about earlier, right? How do you get in the mental space to throw that out and say, I'm going to ignore all of that and I'm going to define success for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that? How do you get into that right space to do that?
Well,
Or how do
so
you help people do that?
yeah, so consonance is the cornerstone of the book, and the
Right.
word consonance, it's funny, you were joking around that that there are a lot of terms in my bio that are great terms, and then you read my bio, which said that I built a search firm called Nonprofit Professionals Advisory Group. So you can tell very early that those great turns of phrase were given me by somebody else because I'm very bad at actually naming things. Nonprofit Professionals Advisory Group, not exactly catchy marketing. So, the book Limitless: How to Ignore Everybody, Carve Your Own Path, and Live Your Best Life was originally going to be called Consonance: Doing Work That Matters, until a friend of mine was like, nobody's going to buy a book
No,
that they don't know the word on the front cover. So
did they
consonance
misinterpret
is
that word?
Yes. So consonance is the opposite of dissonance, which is a word that we all know. Dissonance is cacophony, it's noise, it's things that just don't go together. And consonance is the opposite. It's alignment, it's flow, it's when everything's working in this great way. So I asked people to tell me about a time when the very best of what they were doing was called upon to solve a problem they actually cared about solving. And they were rewarded for that solution in some way that was meaningful, whether it was financial or karmic or education, emotional or whatever to them. So, when was a time when you were doing the very best work you could do to solve a problem that you cared about solving? You were being rewarded for it in a way that was meaningful to you. Those are the moments when you're in consonance. And consonance is made up of 4 things: calling, connection, contribution, and control. And I'll give you a quick couple sentences on each, and then I'll tell you how I give people a little bit different of a shortcut. So
Yeah.
calling is that moment, that thing, that gravitational force that gets you out of bed, the business you want to build, the cause you want to serve, the leader who inspires you, the family you want to nurture. Connection. Does the work you're doing on a daily basis actually get you closer to that calling? Does the work matter? Contribution. Your work should contribute something to your life. So if connection's all about the work, contribution's really all about you. How does this work, this brand, this paycheck, this cause, how does it help you build the life that you want, have the career trajectory you need, manifest your values on a daily basis. What is this work contributing to your life? And then lastly is control, which is simply how much personal agency do you have to be able to control how much this work connects to your calling and how much is it contributing to your life. And what I do is I ask people to think about the scorecard that they have. And we were all, whether it was in high school or college or whenever, given this maybe actually literal scorecard by a guidance counselor who said, this is what makes a good job good. And there were
Yeah.
things on it. I used this all the time in my recruiting career. I would listen for these 8 motivating factors that would convince anybody at any time to take a job. And they were things like, what's the mission of the organization or company? Am I inspired by the leader? What are the skills that I'm going to learn? How broad is the impact? What's the prestige of the brand? Like, how good will it look on my resume? Things like geography and how long is my commute? Things like benefits, and of course, money. But
Yeah.
here's what I learned, that money was not always the top priority. In fact, it was very often not among the top third. People had to make enough money, but it wasn't about the money. It was about what the money meant to their lives. So
Yeah.
I ask people all the time to think about that list and to try to prioritize that list so that it's not just what makes a good job good, but it's what makes a good job good for you. And once they start to think about that, then they can start thinking about what they really are looking for in terms of the connection and the contribution to that calling that they have, and then how they can start implementing having some control, around any of it.
What I mean, I think that's fascinating, and I want. I mean, I think people need to read the book, and I'll talk about that in a minute, because I think that's a concept that we don't talk about enough, right? We don't talk about those elements enough. Can you talk about courage for a second? I was reading the story, and I was thinking about this morning, the major in here that was shot. Now, I remember reading the book last year, and that story really stuck out to me. And to me, that courage just kept coming through my mind when I read that, because it was he almost lost his life, survived, poured himself back into his military career, then I think a career at Tesla, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but there was still this nagging thing that something wasn't quite right. But it was, to me, it was always courage to take on that sort of evaluate yourself and take on that next challenge. But what does courage mean to you? And the second part of that question is, do you think you're courageous?
Well, that's the second part of that question is a tough question. So I'm gonna talk my way around it for a minute. But yes, so yeah, I do start the book with the story of Josh Mance, and just a quick refresher for those who haven't read it. Josh Mance was shot and killed in action by a sniper in Iraq, and he flatlined for 15 full minutes until he was brought back to life. And I met him because he and I both volunteered to speak with a nonprofit that does work with veterans, and we were speaking on an army base in Japan together. And it was really funny because when they called me up and asked me if I'd be willing to go to Japan, they're like, "Oh, it'll be great. You're going to speak. There's this woman who does work with homeless veterans, and there's also the COO of Starbucks Asia, and then there's this other guy who has this clothing line that's veteran owned, veteran operated, and then there's this guy that was killed in Iraq, and then there's you." And I was like, "Dude, I mean." I'm a pretty good speaker, but I can't follow the dead guy. Like that is way too hard. I just no way. I'm like, he's
not
last. That's not fair. So I went right before him. Then he went last. And military audiences are fascinating because this is what they do when you speak.
Yeah,
they just stand there, bolt upright, arms crossed, and they stare at you like information intake mode. And I was like, I'm doing my whole thing, and I'm on stage, and they're staring bullets at me, and I'm like, I am just dying. Like the voice in my back of my head's like, yeah, I'm dying up here. This is terrible. And then they came up to me afterwards and they were like, I learned this and I learned this and I learned this. And I was like, you were the guy in the second row who I thought was plotting my death. Like, how do you? But then Josh gets up and speaks, and it was like you could hear a pin drop in that room. And every one of those men and women leaned forward, and their faces were strained in anguish, and they were right there with him. And I tried, like, gave an elbow to the director, and I was like, "See." So, am I courageous? I wasn't courageous enough to follow the dead guy, that's for sure. But I started the book with him because I feel like all of us have all these excuses about why we don't want to make a big change in our lives so that we can actually finally be successful and happy. And I was like, well, everyone's got it. Yeah, but he, and yeah, but she, but the dead guy's unimpeachable, right? Like, there's just, there's no way that you can say anything about that. So what he did, which I thought was incredibly courageous, is he had everything. He, like, had a speaking career, and he was traveling around the world. He had this great job with Tesla. He had all these things going for him, and everybody told him all day long, "You're the luckiest guy on earth." And he didn't feel so lucky because he has what he says an allurement, but he didn't have alignment. He was like torn between two worlds. He had feet in two different camps, and a speedboat and a canoe, and they're both going in different directions. And he had to just step out of it and say, that's not serving me. That's not working for me. And I have to do this because I can't not do this. And I think that happens a lot, especially with entrepreneurs. It happened with me. I mean, I was in that big firm. I was doing the work at the marquee firm. And then I had this moment of rage, just like Jerry Maguire moment, where, like, I had my manifesto in hand, and if I had a fishbowl in the other, I would have had it. And I stormed out of the office 11 months pregnant. And I was like, we're going to do things differently. And I don't know if it's courage. I can go back and I can rewrite it and say that was pretty courageous of me. But the truth is, in the moment, I was just, I was filled with rage. And I never really thought about it until several years later when I heard Margaret Heffernan, who wrote How She Does It. I heard her speak about the 60 entrepreneurs that she interviewed who had everything from $500,000 of profit line to $500 million of profit line. And she said, to a one, these women had a moment of rage where they said, I could do it faster and better and more authentically, with more integrity, with more profits than these traditional old guys in the traditional old offices. And I sat there in the audience and I was like, oh, I had that moment of rage. That's me. And so I can look back and say, yeah, it was courageous. But the truth is, I couldn't not do it. So I think a lot of times, we can look back and we can tell the story backwards because, they say success leaves clues. I think it's really hard to be courageous forward unless you have a plan. So there's a part in my talk where I talk about how failure is not finale, it's fulcrum. And I mentioned that earlier today.
Right.
And I talk about how, failure is that moment where you learn and you grow and you iterate and you change, and how, we have, like, you and I talked before the show that we have children. And those moments where you go to the parent teacher conferences and they're like, oh, you're Mr. Powers. Oh, yeah, okay. You're like, oh, shoot. And the trickle of sweat starts down the back of your neck, and you're like, my kids are never getting out of the house, and they're going to live in the basement and eat Hot Pockets, and oh my God, what's going to happen? And then you realize, oh, they fail at things as they learn them. Like, and then once they figure it out, they go to the next step. Like, you got pre-algebra, it's time for algebra. You got algebra, it's time for geometry. You got geometry, let's go to trigonometry and hold the phone. Calculus is coming down the pike. And they're supposed to fail and iterate, grow, and change. But we as adults, we get hired because we show competency in something at some point, and somebody's like, you are an X, go. And then you sit there and you don't want to go left and you don't want to go right because you're afraid that you might fail. But failure is not finale, it's fulcrum. And I gave this talk, when I first gave this talk, I gave it at Renaissance Weekend, the very first time I did it a couple of years ago. And I said, failure is not finale, it's fulcrum. And then I looked to stage right, and at stage right was Commander Tim Kopra of NASA.
Oh, nice.
Gone on, not one, not two, but 3 spacewalks. And I was like, failure is not finale, it's fulcrum. Except for you, sir. For you, it would most definitely be failure. But for the rest of us, as long as there's oxygen in our lungs and not tethered to a spacesuit, failure is not finale, it's fulcrum. So I think I don't know if I'm courageous or not. I think what I am is I'm planful. And I ask myself, what would happen if I fail? I make a plan for that. And then I know I don't have to worry about it anymore. and then I move forward.
Mhm.
So, for me, again, I don't know if I'm courageous. I think I just know how to make a plan.
No, that's fair enough. I mean, I think that gives us the confidence to make those decisions and those and have those conversations and have. Um, I mean, one of the reasons I ask is because I am going to work. I'm working on a new book about courage, and and it goes. This show is actually going to turn into a
Yeah.
different show in February, and um, where we talk about courage, and it's really research for a new book. But I mean, I think making
Well, I
that
think
plan gives you
courage.
that courage. It gives you that confidence,
Yeah,
right?
well, and I think courage and confidence are probably intertwined too often. So I think, I mean, where does confidence comes from? Come from? It comes from competence. So it comes from
Yeah.
putting one foot in front of the other. Like I tell a story on stage where I talk about the first marathon I ever ran, which I ran when I was, 41 years old. And I tell about how I never ran a mile in my life till I was 39 years old, and I went from running my first
Hmm.
mile in my life to running my first marathon, not because I woke up one day and I was like, "I'm gonna run a marathon," but I woke up one day and I was like, "Everything hurts. I'm not out of shape, I'm not in shape, I'm not fat, I'm not thin, I'm just kinda here. I've had 2 kids, I've had, birthed 3 businesses, I'm just, like, tired." And I walked into my kid's school and I saw the principal and I was like, "God, you look great. Like, what's going on?" Like, she was 65-year-old woman. I'm like, You've either been really sick because you lost a lot of weight or there's a new man in your life. And what's his name? Because you look too good to be really sick." And she was like, "Well, there is a new man in my life and his name is Coach Mike." And then she proceeds to drag me to this boot camp where I have to do like calisthenics for 45 minutes. And then you get rewarded for finishing that by having to run a mile, and it took me 6 weeks to run that mile. And at the end of those 6 weeks, and literally, I mean, I would, like, hurl at the end of this, and at the end of the 6 weeks, I ran a mile, and of course, all, like, up in my endorphins, I was like, "I'm gonna do 3 of those and do a 5K." So I signed up for a 5K, and 6 weeks later, I run the 5K. And then I was like, "Well, I'm gonna do 2 of those and do a 10K," and on goes the story
Right.
until I live in Boston, so I'm like, "I'm gonna do the Boston Marathon." But the story I tell is to say that my confidence to run the marathon came from my competence of finally running the mile, of finally doing the 5K, of finally doing the
Yeah.
10K, of finally doing the half marathon, and going through the weeks and weeks and weeks of training. And so I don't think I was courageous to run the marathon. I don't think I was courageous to set those goals. I had confidence to do it because I showed myself competence, but I think it's courageous to walk into that boot camp on the very first day, not knowing what to expect and who's going to be there and how bad it's going to suck and how terrible I'm going to feel. So I would be really interested in how you distinguish between those two things, because I think a lot of times people are courageous not because they have the confidence that they're going to succeed, but despite the fact that they're not sure if they'll succeed or fail.
And I think that also comes too. I've been thinking about this a little bit lately. Is the courage in sort of the perseverance to keep, because every time you're training for that marathon, you're getting up at 4 or 5 in the morning to go run your miles, right? I mean, there's a lot of suck in that, and it takes a little bit of. I think I don't know if it's I don't know what that is, but it takes
Yeah.
something to keep getting out of bed every morning to do it. I don't know if that's disappointment in yourself or what have you, but what do you think that is?
Oh, well, for me, it was absolutely, promise. So, I've been listening. I've been on this new app, Clubhouse, lately. I know that you're on it also, and it's
Yes.
filled with all these, like, just ridiculous, like, hustle porn,
Yeah.
I won't even say the
I,
word, but, these just
yeah.
ridiculous
It's
bros. And they're like, "Here's how I made $1 million with just one simple email." And they're all about, "You gotta do this, and you gotta do this, and you gotta do that, and it's all about accountability, and no, 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 no." And I'm like, "You know what? Accountability, I think accountability is important. I think it's important to have accountability, but for me, just to have accountability, I don't know. Like, if I have an accountability to you, Rhett, that I'm gonna write 5,000 words every week, if I miss a week, I'm gonna be like, "Oh man, Rhett, sorry I didn't do it," you know? But if I make a public commitment I'm going to run this marathon and I'm going to do it to raise money for this charity. It's sort of like I'm making a promise. I'm making a promise to myself. I'm making a promise to you. I'm making a promise to the charity. And I feel like, I don't know, I just take the promise much more seriously than this, like, oh, I forgot to check the box this week. I'll just get to it next week. And I just, I feel like it has to have integrity. And I feel like the difference between accountability and a promise is that integrity.
Do you do that to trick yourself, I guess, into doing things you know you need to do? Is that how you, because we all have these mechanisms, right, to sort of
Yeah.
keep ourselves in check and sort of our own accountability, for our own accountability's sake. Do you do that? Do you kind of state those things publicly so that when you you need to commit to something? Is that one of your?
Yeah. I do. I think that there are maybe 3 types of people in the world. There are people who will never jump out of an airplane. There are people who will jump out of the airplane and check 17 times that the parachute's there. And then there are people who jump out of the airplane and sew the parachute on the way down. And I'm the latter. I'm the last of those 3. But again, I'm planful, so I will sew on the way down, but I get up there knowing how to sew and knowing that I have the cloth and knowing that I have the time and, all of that. So now I never jumped out of an airplane, and I'm sure people are listening are like, "Oh, girl, you can't do any sewing on the way down." But so it's not a literal,
Yeah.
it's not a literal example. But for example, there's a course that goes along with my book, Limitless course, that people can find at heylgo.com/learn if they want. And I built that website with all the promises of what the course is going to do for you and how you're going to feel afterwards and all the way it's going to change your life. And here's the price point and here's how to buy it and all of that before I started building the course. And I posted on Facebook, public promise, right? Public commitment. Hey, friends, I would like some help getting this project I've been working on for 6 months over the finish line.
Yeah.
I hadn't been working on it for 6 minutes, okay? So, would anybody like to take this course for free to give me feedback? I'm starting a Facebook group. And Rhett, I will tell you, within 1 hour, I had 150 people tell me they wanted to
Okay.
take the course. So,
A little
suddenly
pressure.
I was like, well, guess I gotta build it. Number 1, I learned that there's this idea's traction. People want it. They were interested, right? Number
Yeah.
2, I got immediate feedback on the page, so I knew people wanted to see it. I could see how many people saw the post and how many people signed up, and then I was able to build out the course web page where as I was starting to build the components of the course, I could run them by people. I could ask questions like, hey, thanks for helping me get this over the finish line. Do you prefer courses that have more video or more worksheets? Do you prefer courses that have,
Brilliant.
that have group components or individual work? And I could get all those things. And at the same time, I could also start posting some of the actual fodder questions, some of the meat of the course, so that when I then launched the course live a month later, I was able to take out all of the planning stuff and just keep the meat in there. So people who joined the course who were total strangers were like, oh, this is a thing that's already moving. There's already people here. I want to get involved. So it's a way to do that. The last thing I'll say is there are statistics, and I wish I knew them off the top of my head that say that people who run marathons or do these long endurance events for charity actually finish at a higher rate than people who just run them for themselves. And I think that tells you
Interesting.
everything that you need to know about making that public commitment, making that promise to somebody other than yourself.
No, that's brilliant. And I think so spot on. And I now have some now I know how to get myself to do some things that I know I want to do.
Tell
Let me ask
somebody, tell
you,
them publicly.
let me ask you one final question, and that is, what scares you right now, and what are you really excited about that's going on in the
Oh,
world?
uh, what scares me right now? Um, I am I don't wanna get super political because I know that's not the point of the show, but I will say
It is
that
whatever. Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
okay, what scares me right now is the continued assault on knowledge, on learning, on science. on civic education. I am deeply worried about the long tail of
Yeah.
the denigration of facts, of of thinking critically, of listening to other people. I am really worried about that, and what excites me right now are the teenagers in my house who understand that and get it and are thinking the opposite way. For example, my kids didn't want to go to school this last week after the holiday break. And I said, well, why don't you want to go to school? And they're like, because we've seen so many people on our social media, some of all of our, quote unquote friends, our classmates at school who are going to parties, small, small spaces, lots of people, no masks. And we don't want to go because we're afraid that we're going to get exposed. And even if we don't get exposed because they're not our close friends, we still get the close contact. And that means that I'll be out of school for 2 weeks. I got to get a COVID test, all that stuff. And I said, well, yeah, that sucks. And those kids are idiots. And I'm upset with them that I don't entirely blame them because they don't have frontal lobes, right? They're like 15, 16, 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
I blame their parents because their parents know about it and they're there. And my 16-year-old turns to me and says, I don't have a frontal lobe and I know it's wrong. You should blame them too. And the fact that
Wow.
our kids are growing
Wow.
up at this time where they are understanding personal responsibility and community before self in a way that I feel like there have been, 20 years of that being pulled out of the way our kids are educated. I think that that gives me hope.
Fascinating. I mean, I got to ask this now. What was your take on what happened last week in
Well,
Washington? I mean,
my take on
I'm
what,
just curious what a 15-year-old's perspective was, because that's
yeah, yeah. What was their take on what happened last week?
yeah,
They're angry. They're really angry. To give some context, my 18-year-old is applying for the Air Force Academy. He wants to serve this country. He wants to fly in space. He wants to become a test pilot. This is what he wants to do. He's always wanted to do it. He believes in service to his core. My younger son is gay, and he when over the summer when BLM was happening, I said to my family, I'd like to fly an American flag outside of our house. I feel like that symbol has been taken over by by people who are not espousing what I think our country should stand for, and I'd like to do it. And my older son, who wants to serve, was like, "Yes, I'd like to do that." And my younger son said, I don't necessarily want to because I don't feel like that's a country. This as a country is a place that believes I should be who I am and I can have full rights. And so when what happened last week went down, I think the consensus in our family was that every every congressman who got on the House floor or the Senate floor and said, "This isn't America," we were all like, actually, this is America. And it's time that we face that this is America and that we do something about it. And so they get that and they see it and they don't have these rose colored glasses that, like, it can all be apple pie and motherhood. They're like, no, there's some bad stuff that's happening that shouldn't be. And it's time for you grown-ups to get the hell out of the way so we can fix it. And
wow.
frankly, given how we've all been behaving, I don't know that they're wrong.
Fair enough. It's always fascinating. I've got two teenagers myself, and so it's always interesting to see what other kids are thinking and what, because we don't have the luxury
Right.
of having a bunch of kids over nowadays like we used to. So, I mean, it's interesting to hear what other parents are saying their kids are thinking. So,
Yeah.
thank you for
Well,
that.
and
That
you're
was a
seeing it
little.
from a distance, so I'm sort of curious if it's different in your house or if they're feeling the same way.
Um, it's confusing. I mean, because our family has, from the Peace Corps to, I mean, we've always been a family of service in
Mhm.
one way or the other. And for us, I think it's just it's counter to everything we've always talked about.
Yes.
And so I think um, there's a lot of processing going on and a lot of you know I kind of actually wish we were back in DC, because I think to see it,
Yes.
and they've lived all over the world. They've only lived in the U.S. for about 18 months of their lives,
Mm.
and So, I mean, but they've seen things around the world that other kids haven't. But I think this would have been interesting to see. I think this would have been important to see. So I'm a little disappointed we weren't there to sort of experience it. And I think that would have been a really powerful moment in their lives. We
Yeah.
have to watch it on TV like everybody else.
Well, I don't know
But
how much you'd be able to see because everything's cordoned off and it's closed and you can't see it. And so, I don't know how much you'd actually be able to physically see in person. What I can tell you, which deeply disappointed me last week, I mean, my kids go to a super progressive private school, and yet it was like business as usual last week. And the fact that their teachers, the fact that the school didn't just like halt classes and say, we're going to spend the afternoon talking about civics and like watching this live and having conversation as it unfolded. What a lost opportunity. I feel like every school, I think I tweeted this, that every school in the country should have canceled classes and changed their curriculum to be responsive to what was going on. And
well,
regardless of
you and I are the same age, about the same age, and I mean, we did that for the Challenger when the Challenger blew up when we were kids.
yeah.
We stopped
I mean,
classes and we talked
yeah,
about it and we watched it, and I mean, it
yes.
was a moment that I will remember as a student my whole life.
I mean,
Right?
I was literally in the middle of dissecting a frog in biology, and I had Corey on one side of me and Ed on the other side of me, and Mr. Bassinet rolled the TV in, and we watched it. We
Yeah,
watched it, and then we cried when Ronald Reagan talked about, ascending and seeing, the final, I forgot what it was, but,
right.
it's just
Yeah,
such
right.
it was an
Touching God, or it
incredible.
was yeah,
Right, or touch the face of God, right? It was such an incredible moment, and I I I think that we have to get back to a place where the Challenger is a shared experience, 9/11 is a shared experience, the Capitol siege was a shared experience, and that we understand that this is America, but it doesn't have to be America, that we can be better. We can have conversations. We can listen. And I talked about this in your group last week that I do feel like service is the way to do it, whether it's Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or military service, but having some way where we have shared experiences with people that don't look like us, love like us, think like us, pray like us. I think that that's really important. So yeah, I
yeah.
didn't want to get political, but here we are. I mean,
No,
my
we went
first
off
job
we
was
went
working
off
in
the
the
rails.
White House. So
We went off the rails, but that's okay because it is one of those.
so did the
Um,
country. So we all went
so in
off
the
the
country,
rails.
but I mean that it's an important point. I mean one that you can't really. I think we can't talk about enough because we have to think. You and I work with companies and leaders about transformation and leadership, and that's what we do, right? We help try to transform people and companies, but I think it warrants a little conversation about our own country because we have to think about doing this differently, and we have
Yes.
to think about the moment now. This is the moment now to really rethink. I mean, I am not opposed to like a national service at 18. Instead of going, I was just talking to my son about a gap year. I mean, it's the first time that conversation's ever come up. But
Yeah.
as COVID drags on another year, I'm thinking that's not such a bad thing to go and do some good in the world somewhere, do work on a project somewhere
Yes.
away from home, have a little growth, have a little more time that you didn't get this past year.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think we've got to think about that. We've got to think about bringing people together and how do we do that? And
I mean,
and
I'd like
a
to
year of
see a
service is not
national
a bad
vaccine
idea.
corps. I'd like to see a national vaccine corps. I mean, we have these like 17, 18, 19-year-olds that are like, they got nothing to do. Their summers are unplanned now. And, maybe we teach them how to give vaccines. I don't know. Maybe there's liability into that, but they certainly can be the people who like, they do the intake. They give people the directions.
Yeah,
They do the administrative processing. They reach out into communities. They go door to door and knocking and tell people where to go. I mean, this can be an all hands on deck effort. And in exchange for doing that work, maybe they get some college tuition, maybe they get some debt relief. I mean, there is so much that we can do if we come together. This is a country who has always
yeah.
done big things when it's had to.
Well, you've got
And we
7,000 Peace Corps. You got 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers that just got moved last year from the field.
yes,
Bring them
yeah,
home and do
bring
something.
them home.
Bring them home, but
Bring 'em
they're home. They're not. A lot of them still aren't doing anything because of COVID. Put
Yes.
them to work.
Put them to
These are
work.
people who wanted to. These are people who wanted to serve their country.
Yes, and think about it, like, we have, like, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, I helped build AmeriCorps. Like, I did it because I heard Bill Clinton talk about this idea that there's nothing that's wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with America. And I feel like we're right there right now, except the difference between then and now. I mean, then there was the distant memory of the civil rights movement, but right now we have the very clear and sharp memory of this summer in the BLM protests. And so what if we built a more expanded national service, a national vaccine course, some sort of compulsory service? And maybe it's when they're 18, maybe some kids can't do it because they're 18 because there's other hardships, but sometime before you're, say, 27 years old or something, you give a year of service. And we did it through the lens of understanding that not everybody comes to it the same way, and that there are ways that we can see each other that we haven't been able to see before. And I think like, if you look at Congress has gotten less and less and less effective as fewer and fewer and fewer service veterans are serving. I think
Right.
that there's something to that. People who are elected who had a history putting country before party will put country before party. 20 years of executive search tells me that past is prologue, and that's all you need to know. Now, obviously, there are going to be people who are there who will still put party before country, but when a fighter pilot gets into the cockpit and gets orders to defend this country, they don't look at the guy or the gal behind them and say, "Hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat?" They're like, "We're going to execute this mission." And I just feel like we need to bring a little bit of that back. So I
I'm
don't know,
on
that's
the
my soapbox.
no, no, no. I agree with I agree with you. I'm on the National Peace Corps Association board, and one of the things, I've been on the board for a couple of years now, but even in the 3 years that I've been on, when I came on the board, we had, I think, 4 members of Congress that had served in the Peace Corps. Now we have 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's definitely a direct correlation between, between what the sort of the way that the conversation, the dialogue and the rhetoric and the nonsense.
Yes.
So anyway, we got to go because we've been.
I know we're over the hour.
We've been on for a long time. And I know you. I want to.
We could do a whole other show on this topic.
I want to be respectful to your schedule, but it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you for spending some time with us. I'm glad we got to Laura's book, Limitless. Go out and get yourself a copy. I'm sure you can get it anywhere books are sold these days. But please do go out and get yourself a copy and reach out to Laura if you want to talk about the book or bring her on to speak. And Laura, where's your show? When your show? What is going to come back on when?
It's going to come back on February 5th, I think is the first Tuesday of February. Maybe it's February 6th, but it's on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook at Hey LGO. You can see right down there is how you find me on all social channels. And it's at 9 a.m. Eastern on Tuesdays and Fridays. Awesome.
Hopefully people follow her so that you get notified about when that show is. Hey, tomorrow we've got Mike Pozanansky on the program. I know I just massacred Mike's name. I apologize, Mike. But we'll be back on tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, and we'll see you then. Have a great day.